Hello and welcome to DEI Advisors. My name is Lan Elliott on behalf of DEI Advisors. And today's guest advisor is Michael Evans, who is the president of Marcus Hotels and Resorts. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. For those of you who don't know Marcus Hotels, they are a publicly traded owner operator of hotels, and they've actually been around for 87 years, which is something I didn't know about. So thank you for sharing that, Michael. Michael, we've actually been friends for a while, so I happen to know you have a really interesting career journey. Could you share with us some of the inflection points in your career and if there was a particular factor or something that you think contributed to your success?
Sure. So starting with the inflection points, I think there's been a number of them. Most of them relate to sort of big career moves that I made. Beginning with when I left the practice of law. So, I went to law school to knowing I did not want to be an attorney. But when I got out, I figured I should get some real world experience in that. And so I practiced law for 3 years. I was always interested in real estate and development generally, not specifically hotels at that time. And spent a lot of time looking and talking to people about different opportunities in real estate. And the opportunity came up to join Marriott up at their headquarters. They had just formed, and this is in the late 90s, had just formed a group to work on restructurings and things like that. And so I joined Marriott, and that was, the beginning of my career in hospitality. And then, kind of the next inflection point I would say was so I was with Marriott. I'd been at headquarters 6 years and had the opportunity to move overseas with Marriott, moved to Hong Kong to do development throughout Asia, and then eventually moved to London, where I did development for Marriott in Europe and the Middle East. And that international experience was a true turning point, I think, in my career, and it's something that I think really helped me advance my career. So those are two major inflection points. And then I eventually went to I left Marriott after 10 years, went to Las Vegas, joined MGM, and this is in early 2008, and we were really focused on experiential hospitality, and that was before. It was a buzzword. It was before we had as the proliferation of lifestyle hotels and soft brands. And I really think of MGM as being one of the leaders in experiential hospitality, and being able to be a part of that, I think really helped me a lot and helped my career. And then, then the last inflection point would be when I joined a little more than 3 years ago, Marcus Hotels and Resorts, and had the opportunity to, pull together kind of everything that I'd learned throughout my career and the ability to lead and continue to develop this hotel and lead some really amazing teams. So, yeah, those are kind of the main inflection points, I would say, throughout my career. I think you asked. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I think you asked about what contributed to my success. So, a number of things. One, and I really think being passionate about whatever I've been doing. I think it's critical for anyone. Whatever you're going to do, you have to be passionate about it. We spend so much time, in our careers and work that if you're not passionate about it, you won't excel at it and you won't be great. So I think that's number one. I think also being a strategic thinker, knowing how to analyze situations and develop and execute a sound plan. I think that was really helpful for me. I'd say, another point, and I think my family would probably take issue with this, but having a reasonable amount of emotional intelligence, right? Really, the ability to effectively manage people and to work with people both inside and outside of the organization. And so I think that's been helpful. I'll tell you a quick story. So when I first joined Marriott, I was in my kind of late 20s. Relatively junior position. Then I was a manager, but I was working on some pretty big projects, and I had to influence a lot of people that were much more senior than me, and I think the ability to do that effectively really led to a fair amount of success that I had at Marriott, which of course then led on to other opportunities within my career. So I say those things combined with a really strong work ethic are kind of some of the keys to my success.
Really great points and things that people don't always talk about, right? They talk about getting skills, but they don't really talk about the EQ. They don't talk about being able to influence people around in the organization, and might not be people that report to you. You really still have to have influence across the organization. And that's a skill that's really important to develop. So I love that you shared that. So, Michael, you don't get to where you are without overcoming a few obstacles. Can you share a little bit about how you process obstacles? Like, what do you look for first? What do you do first when you come across something like that?
Well, first of all, I think it's really critical when you're facing obstacles and challenges to stay calm and level-headed, right? I have this saying that we can only do what we can do. We can only control what we can control. I must have said that a million times to the team, throughout the pandemic and certainly the early days of the pandemic, right? And so, getting excited doesn't help. We don't do our best thinking when we're excited. So staying calm, I think, is really critical to start with. And then I think really thinking about, what's the root cause of the challenge that we're facing, the issue. I have another expression, which is sort of the bottom line is, right? I like just zeroing in and getting to what's the bottom line of something and understanding what's causing a challenge. From there, put together, you develop a plan, right? And so you understand what the issue is, you put a plan together, and then I think it's just a matter of working to execute on that, while at the same time being kind of mindful that your plan may not address the challenge. You may have to pivot and to have sort of a plan B, so to speak, right? But that's sort of how I would say that I process challenges that I'm facing.
Any advice on motivating your team when they're tackling a challenge?
Well, well, one is, and it's not easy to do, but to get people to focus on staying calm, right? It's not everyone's nature to do that. So starting there, as I said, but then really ensuring and getting people to work together as a team, right? And knowing that we're going to work in a collaborative manner, and that ensuring that everyone sort of, it feels like we're part of the team and that we have each other's backs. And when there's a challenging situation, working in that type of environment, I find always proves to be much more successful.
That's great. Thank you. Moving on to a related topic, but it's around taking risks. And you've taken a number of risks throughout your career, and you've mentioned a few of them. But could you share an example of where you've successfully taken a risk, and how you mentally prepare yourself to take a chance on something?
Yeah. Well, I first of all, I think, as you know, I'm a little bit predisposed to risk taking, probably more than a lot of people, right? I mean, I spent a good part of my 20s jumping out of airplanes for fun, and I love deep water scuba diving, and as you know, motorcycling has been my lifelong passion and hobby. So I'm
yes, I
predisposed.
remember you telling me that sports are no fun if you can't potentially die doing them. So
Did I say that? Oh, I may have, but no, but so, but seriously, I really approach calculated risks in business kind of the same way that I approach those related to my hobbies, right? And that is to start off by educating myself. You don't just jump out of a plane or go scuba diving or jump on a motorcycle without proper training. And the same thing really applies when it comes to business risks, right? You have to educate yourself, and you have to research the issue and get as much information as you possibly can about the issue at hand. And that includes evaluating all the risks and the rewards, considering worst case scenario, and then evaluating all that and coming up and making an informed decision. And I think that's really critical. And then again, similar to what I said earlier, having a contingency plan, right? If things don't go as planned, when you take this risk, have a plan B, and knowing how to pivot and being prepared to do so.
yeah, things don't always go the way that you think. So sometimes you can come up with the best plan, and then the world turns left, like it did a few years ago, and you have to adapt, right?
Absolutely, that happened. I joined Marcus in January of 20, and so I literally finished touring our last hotel on March 10th of 20, and then 3 days later the world shut down. So big pivot for sure.
Well, you got in all the hotel tours at the right moment so that you could lead the company from Milwaukee.
I did. Yeah.
I wanted to talk a little bit about developing a network because that's something that people aren't always comfortable digging into because it's not something that maybe their personality doesn't lend themselves to it. Walking into a cocktail party where you don't know anybody seems really scary. But hospitality is really a business that is very relationship based. We actually met negotiating across the table from one another is how we first met, and we ended up becoming great friends. And can you share a little bit about how you've built your network and maybe how do you network in a way that suits your personality?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm going to start by saying, I mean, the major foundation for my network was honestly built back in my early days at Marriott, right? Some of my closest relationships, including you and your husband Mike, are from those early days, right? I mean, I think there was something about all of us, even though you and I work for two different companies, we work pretty closely together in deals. There's something about being in the trenches together. I think while we're building our careers, that made people a lot closer. And I look back, and I think it's over 25 years now, around 25 years that since those relationships were established, and honestly, those relationships that I established back in those days really remain some of my most trusted and valued connections and relationships. So I think that's really important, and I don't want to get on too much of a soapbox here, but it's actually leads to kind of one of my concerns that I have about work today and the desire for many people that want to work remotely.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think there's a lot of discussion about negative impact on culture and impact on collaboration around that. But I also think one of the impacts of remote work and what that can have is on people's long-term relationships, because you just can't build that same level of relationship with people if you're not together. And so, when I look back on the relationships that I built, as I said, they were built sort of in the trenches together. And I think it's important to do that. I'll get off my soapbox now about that issue. But, so you asked about how do I network and kind of what suits my personality, right? So I love meeting new people. I truly do. But at the same time, I have really I'd say a relatively low tolerance for kind of repetitive BS conversations, right? I mean, we've all been to industry conferences where by the end of the 2 or 3 days, we feel like we've gone through Groundhog Day, right? And had the same conversations over and over. I don't think anybody enjoys that. And so for me, when I am meeting new people, I always try to find some level of personal connection to the person, right? I mean, that could be a common place that we worked. Fortunately, there are thousands and thousands of Marriott alumni. It could be a common friend. It could be a place where we've lived or traveled, or even better, a shared hobby or passion, right? So try and find some sort of personal connection to the person. I think that makes a difference. It makes them stand out to you and makes you more memorable to them as well. So I think that's important. And then, kind of 2 other points around networking that I would make is that, one, I think it's really important to get involved and be active in all the various industry groups and organizations. Obviously, there's big ones like AHLA, which leads our industry, but there's a lot of other subgroups and smaller groups that are focused on particular segments of the business. Many of the larger companies have internal groups that people can join. So I think that's really, really critical. It's a great way to meet people, and it's a great way to, build up your reputation. And then the second would be speaking engagements, right? And I think try and do what you can to secure speaking engagements, and so people, hear your name, and over time, you do enough of those, and you become more of a known quantity in the industry, right? So so those are kind of the 2 things I'd say around that.
That's such great advice because I think a lot of people will shy away from public speaking, and it is such an important component of building your personal brand and getting exposure out there. So I think it's worthwhile, and it does take time and practice. But the more you do it, the more comfortable you get with it. So I love that you mentioned that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Switching gears over to mentors and champions, because I know you've had a few in your amazing career. How have your mentors or your champions helped advance your career?
So it's interesting. I don't know that I have any real formal mentors. There's a lot of people that I actually learned a lot from, right? I mean, beginning with kind of the attorneys that I worked for right out of law school, I learned a tremendous amount from them. I learned about how to be an effective communicator, both orally and in writing, which is really important. I learned, early on in my career at Marriott, right? I had the opportunity to learn a lot from the late Jim Sullivan, right? I mean, anyone that was either worked in development and did deals at Marriott, or was developer of hotels during that time, kind of from what Jim was there, I think mid '80s to I think he retired in '08 or '09, right? And Jim was so focused on thinking about deals from every single angle, right? You had to really strategize and think about every aspect of a deal, how best to position something, how best to negotiate it, and lots of different alternatives. And so thinking about deals holistically, I really learned a lot from Jim. Now, Jim had a heart of gold that he tried to hide, I think, behind his like rough exterior, and so it was a lot of self-preservation, right? Learning from him. And so while he wasn't an official mentor of mine, I learned a tremendous amount from him, as I know so many people in the industry did as well. I'd also say, because you used the word champions, I did have a number of champions that really played a major role in advancing my career. One of those champions is someone that both you and I have worked for. So Joel Eisman, right? I worked for Joel early on in my days at Marriott. You worked for him more recently at IHG. But Joel had come back from Asia. He was the first person to head up development in Asia for Marriott. And he was there, I'm not sure exactly how long. I think it was over a decade, I believe. And when he came back to Bethesda, he headed up the global asset management team, which I was part of. So I worked for Joel, and he was a big supporter of mine and was really instrumental in helping make happen that big move to Hong Kong initially. And as I mentioned earlier, that was a major inflection point in my career. And so certainly Joel was one of the bigger champions that had a big effect on my career. And there's been others along the way, people that have seen some level of promise in me and have provided me with opportunities to advance my career.
That's great. So let me ask you this. How important do you think is it to find mentors and champions, even if they're not formal mentors or what have you? How important is that? And how can people go about it? Because we've heard there's a right way and there's a wrong way to do it.
Yeah. Well, I do think it's very important. We need to have people that believe in us and help advance our careers, right? I also believe that leaders today naturally want to help more junior people, right? You want to help people that show promise and show commitment, and so I really think that the best way to find champions and mentors is to start by demonstrate your passion, demonstrate your hard work, your commitment, and quite frankly some level of promise that you can one day be a strong leader. I think if you do that, people will want to help you. So I think that's sort of table stakes, right? I then think you can be proactive about it as well. And I honestly wasn't very good about this in my career, but looking back on it, I realized I probably should have been more proactive about actually asking people for help and mentorship. And I think it's good for people to do that. I do think you have to be, I'll say, specific about what it is that you're looking for from the mentorship and from the relationship. I think you need to be really open about, the feedback that you're going to get. But if you can identify someone that you really want to learn from, I think that approaching them and asking them for some guidance or mentorship, is certainly something that you should do. And I think you'll find that most leaders will be more than happy to provide mentorship.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's one of the wonderful things about our industry is that people naturally want to help one another. So doing a great job is a good way to do that.
Right.
Start that conversation. One of the things I want to talk about was leadership style, because in looking at our industry, we don't have as many women leaders as at the top as we have women employees at the bottom of our industry, if you think of it as a pyramid. And women leaders tend to have a different style than men, is what I've noticed. But what characteristics or leadership style do you look for in your leaders?
Well, look, I think it's really important for leaders to be sort of action oriented and, results driven, right? I mean, and so, um, you've heard in the past when people talk about being, people need to be aggressive or assertive, and I kind of sometimes can be equated to sort of acting like a jerk, right? Which I'm going to use a nice language here since we're being videoed, but and I don't think that's the right approach, right? I mean, I think um, I think leading by fear and is a really outdated concept, and I think it's much more effective to take sort of an affiliative leadership approach, right? Whereby you're building trust within the group and create emotional bonds and promote a sense of belonging within the organization. I think that's how you really lead. And so, I'll tell you, I mean, the approach I take is sort of, I've always thought of it as three simple steps, or maybe simple to say, a little harder to execute. But I think of leadership sort of this way, right? You start off by building a team of not only talented people but passionate people. That's one. Two, create an environment that encourages collaboration and open communication among the team. And then third, empowering people to do their jobs, right? So you empower them while holding them accountable to clearly establish goals and milestones. So that's really what I find to be the most effective form of leadership. Not an aggressive, in your face, again, acting like a jerk type approach.
Yeah, that pound on the table approach is really, I think that its time has passed.
It has, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Thank you for the 3 points. Switching over to leading diverse teams, as you mentioned, you've lived in a lot of places in Hong Kong, in Europe, but also working in throughout Europe and the Middle East when you were there, and then going over to gaming, which is kind of a different environment than the hospitality world that we had been in. So thinking about diversity can be so much more than race and gender. It can be diversity of thought or of different cultures or backgrounds. Given your work experience working around the world, managing diverse teams can actually be more challenging than working with a homogeneous team that all think the same way and have the same background. What's been your experience working with people from diverse cultures and different ways of thinking, and how do you manage that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me say that, working with people from diverse cultures, it really has been one of the highlights of my career. Without a doubt, learning to work and partner with people from various cultures made me a much more effective leader. Again, that really started when I moved to Hong Kong. There's a real difference in the way people do business around the world. Right? In the U.S., we work on deals, we get stuff done, and then through that process, sometimes you build a friendship or relationship with the people. In Asia and the Middle East, right, it's the exact opposite. So you don't get a deal done with somebody in Asia or the Middle East unless you've built a relationship with them first and there's a level of trust. Really very different approach to how we do things in the West, right? Even within Asia, for example, and within certain markets, there's differences. How you do business in Japan is very different from how you do business in China versus how you do business in Vietnam or any of the other countries, right? So you really have to be very focused on the cultural differences. And then, something that I learned by doing business over there and working with teams, right? I went over there and my colleagues were almost all from different cultures. And you learn how important it is to really to stop and listen, try and read people's body language and really try and understand and appreciate the diverse perspectives that they bring from their culture. And doing that is, I think, really critical to having success in leading a diverse team, right? Understanding people kind of where they're coming from and their perspective, and not just through, your lens.
Yeah, that's so true. And especially now, as inclusive cultures are become much more part of the common conversation and you're meeting people where they are. I think this idea just to dive in and just start going into the business side, which is what we've done mostly in the US, that approach is not going to work. It doesn't work in every culture, as you mentioned, but it also maybe doesn't work with every person, even here in the United States. So I love the idea of stopping and taking the time to get to know people that you're going to be working closely with.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of our favorite questions at DEI Advisors is, what advice would you give to your younger self? And I think it does lead to a bit of self-reflection to think about where you are now versus where you were then. So, yeah. Michael, what advice would you give to your younger self?
So it's interesting. I actually had a chance to think about this type of question about a year and a half ago. So when my oldest son, Gavin, was heading off to college for his freshman year, at that time, I wrote him a very long letter with kind of all my thoughts about life and the things I wish I knew when I went off to college. So I gave this actually a lot of thought then. There were a lot of personal things in that letter, but some of the key themes and things that I touched on, one was the importance of intellectual curiosity, and the importance of learning things, not just because you have to for a test or for your diploma or a work requirement, but simply better yourself, right? And become more knowledgeable and be more educated. So I think that's something that's really important that I wish I knew and focused on a little bit more back in my freshman year in college.
I think you were busy then.
I was. Second, I think is the importance of balance in your life. I mean, I've always found that balance to be really important. And I knew this back then, but I think I had a difficult time perhaps finding that right balance, right? And particularly early on in my career, I was so driven, and I'm not sure that I had the right level of balance between my professional career and personal life. Although, I still found time to do things with my family and share a lot of common interests, and we have a great relationship with my wife and kids. I wish in those early years of their life I had a little bit more balance. So that's one. And then last thing I'll touch on is just the importance of patience.
Patience. I mean, Michael, most of your hobbies, racing motorcycles, has nothing to do with patience, right?
You're right. And so, and this is something that I wish I knew back then, is that patience, and I'm really thinking about from the standpoint of kind of career choices, right? And there were definitely times where I made decisions around my career because I wasn't as patient as perhaps I should have been. And look, I'm very happy with the way my career has turned out, and I never look backwards. But that being said, I have thought about when I made certain decisions to make moves. Some of that was driven by impatience, and it's not necessarily, you never know how life would have turned out or what path that would have gone down. But I really do think it's important to not be too impatient with your career, and learn as much as you can, get as much as you can out of each opportunity while you're there, and appreciate that. And usually when you do good work and do good things, it leads to success.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Gavin is lucky to have that letter. So I wanted to ask you one fun question, because one of the things that we enjoy doing with our spouses when we get together is go out for great meals. And you recently moved to Milwaukee. And for anyone who lives in Milwaukee or is visiting Milwaukee, have you found a favorite restaurant that you and your wife like to go to?
I have. So there's lots of great restaurants in Milwaukee, actually. I moved here from Vegas, as you know, and Vegas is, the capital. Some people might argue New York, but in the U.S., Vegas has pretty amazing restaurants, right? And but they're not as authentic as they're all replicas of someplace else. And one thing we really loved when we moved to Milwaukee was how authentic our restaurants are. We have very few chains, actually. Downtown, there's almost no chains restaurants. So a lot of great restaurants here. We operate a lot of great restaurants, but one of our favorites actually is a restaurant called Old Germantown. It's a restaurant on a 125-acre farm, and it's owned by a family. They've lived on the farm for 35 years. They raised their kids there, and when they retired, Scott, one of the founders, was in education. When he retired, he had this dream of building this restaurant on their farm, and he was passionate about making homemade sausages and homemade beer, and they built this beautiful restaurant. Well, they opened it in November of 20, about the worst time that you could open a restaurant, right? Most restaurants were closing down, and that's when they opened. And my wife Sheila had read about this, that it was going to be opening in the paper, and we went the opening day, fell in love with the restaurant, and with the owners. We become friends with the family, and it's a spectacular, really authentic, amazing place with great food and great atmosphere. So anyone that is visiting Milwaukee, they should definitely go visit Old Germantown.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that great tip. And I hope Mike and I can join you and Sheila there one day when we come out to visit.
Absolutely.
Well, I know I can always spend lots of time with you, but our time is getting towards the end. And so I wanted to ask you for one final piece of advice, if you could share with our viewers, keeping in mind that DEI Advisors' mission is centered around empowering personal success. What final tidbit of advice would you offer our viewers who are looking to advance their careers?
So, yeah, I hope this isn't too simple, right? But I think of a couple of things. One, keep learning, right? I touched on this a little bit earlier with intellectual curiosity, but keep learning, go above and beyond, to become true subject matter experts in your field and other fields, right? And know more. If you're in marketing, well, learn more than just marketing, right? And if you're in development, learn beyond development. So learning everything you can, I think, is really critical in the first place. Second, I'd say, put in the hard work. Demonstrate, your passion and your commitment and the expertise that you have. And then, lastly, I'd say, be a proactive networker and an affiliative leader, as I talked about. Focus on building those strong relationships up, down, and across the organization, as well as within the industry. And I think following those steps, while it's obviously very high level, I think are really key to having a long and successful career.
Amazing advice. Thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate you sharing your journey and your advice for how you managed to accomplish so much in your wonderful career. Not that you're done yet,
No,
but
far from it.
Far from it, absolutely.
Yeah.
And
well, for the opportunity, I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So happy to have you on. And for our viewers, if you enjoyed this interview with Michael, we hope you'll join us on our website at deiadvisors.org for more great interviews. Thank you.